Welcome back to How to Tickle Yourself. I'm your host, Duff McDonald, along with my co-host, Matt McButter. Today's guest comes to us from within the family. Almost. Sort of. I know Sophie Rochester because her sister is married to my brother.
Nepotism.
So the Rochesters are basically the British branch of the McDonald family at this point. And it's such an impressive branch that when Joey and I took Marguerite to London last summer, she came back saying that she was moving to England because by comparison, America was trash.
Ooh.
Which brings us back to Sophie. She's not trash, she's treasure. But a big part of what she does is make sure that one man's trash does not turn into, or does turn into another man's treasure. We'll get back to that in a moment. Sophie's worked for over 20 years in the UK creative industries, specializing for a decade in digital publishing, ahead of the game with consultancy, The Literary Platform. And more recently, she's been involved in the circular economy and creative industries, making and crafts with her current company, Yodomo. She worked at Random House, Fourth Estate, Coleman Getty. To some of our American and Canadian listeners, we're talking some British properties here. All of Us and Good Technology. She also consulted with Pan Macmillan, Hachette, Penguin Random House. If you look behind me, listeners, down here, I have a set of little snippets from Penguin that I got from Sophie maybe 15 years ago. In 2018, she founded the award-winning Yodomo, a company dedicated to exploring best practices in the reuse of materials through growing participation in making and crafts. She also wrote a book, which we have in this house, called Making a Living, How to Craft Your Business. Like many, she has recently and increasingly become focused on environmental matters and has placed the work of Yodomo firmly within the circular economy. Most interestingly, to me at least, is working with the London Borough of Hackney to develop a fully circular system that diverts commercial pre-consumer waste that can be reused from landfill and incineration and instead redistributes it to the local creative community. It's just amazing. Welcome to the show, sister. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
At the present moment, traveling town to town, the mystery of the motion, right here, right now. Right here, right now. Whoa, right here, right now.
So many of us have heard about the circular economy, and you will see it touted in various places. You are the only person I know who I actually know to be truly working in the circular economy. Tell us about this stuff you're doing with the Borough of Hackney. I think it's fascinating.
Thanks. Yep, there's a lot of noise about circularity and the circular economy. And I discovered this week that I'm what is known as a middle actor, which is someone who's actually doing the work. And there's obviously a lot of top-down stuff happening with governments trying to introduce circular economy approaches. And then there's a lot of grassroots stuff. And I guess we're somewhere in the middle. 12 months ago, we pitched to Hackney Council and asked them to let us trial a new format, a new system within the borough where we would work with local businesses, find out what waste they had, and try and reallocate that to the maker community. I guess caveat for Hackney is that it's a very creative borough. You know, it's East London. There are a lot of makers that live there, a lot of craftspeople. But anyway, Hackney went for it. They had a fund going, and we were able to fund a 9-month pilot, which has just come to an end. And what we've been able to do is install ourselves at Hackney City Farm, which is a working farm right in the middle of the borough, which has a baby donkey, some goats. And I had a tiny little shop there, which used to be the farm shop where they sold eggs. And we've now installed ourselves in there. And it's become a kind of materials hub. So there we receive materials from local businesses. They're always pre-consumer. So we're not dealing with clothing or stuff that's dirty. It's always clean, domestic grade materials. And then if you're one of our members, you become a creative reuse member. And you come along to the farm and you can take away materials. We have a few rules. There are a few rules. So you're not allowed to do a massive land grab and just grab loads of materials and go and sell them down at the market 2 minutes down the road. And also, we're kind of aware that there are hoarders. People, if you just say free stuff, people will just take stuff for the sake of it. So when we ask our creative reuse members to tell us what they think they're going to do with the materials, and they take away enough for their project, and they're not allowed to take away more materials until they've shown us what they did with the first lot. So it just kind of controls it a little bit. And the other bit that's maybe slightly different from other scrap stores or creative reuse centers, as like you would call them in the US, is that we then try and track what happens to the waste. So we then have a relationship with those makers, and they feed back to us the projects that they've created with the waste. And this gives us a really nice full circle system so that we can actually tell businesses, look, you were going to put this into landfill, you were going to incinerate this, but look what has happened with your waste. And that's a really positive thing. And the other really positive thing is that the UK creative businesses, these are all like micro businesses. So we're actually supporting a local economy as well with low cost or free materials, which is another kind of plus point. So yeah, all in all, it's working really well. We've been really overwhelmed with the response. We've managed to divert just under 3 tons of materials from incineration. We've now got 1,000 creative reuse members who are really active and engaged community. And we've had a number of other local authorities who are looking to try and replicate it around the UK. We're just trying to work out our next best step on that. So far, so good.
Really cool. Tell us a little bit of, who are some of the, producers, and then like what kind, and who are some of the makers, and what types of things are they crafting? I'm picturing like, a cup made out of recycled tires, and a, shirt made out of, maybe some extra fabric or something like that from some textile company. Is it stuff like that?
So I guess there's a real range. So we have, we started off very wide. Originally, we said, okay, we're just going to take any waste that any company is getting rid of. And then we soon worked out that we were going to have to focus a little bit, because within the budget and the borough, we really needed to try and make sure that the flow was sufficient, that we knew that what we were getting in, we knew we could get rid of as well. Otherwise, we were going to have our own waste problems. So getting that flow right was quite important. And we hit quite early on to the solution that textile waste was going to be a real problem for us, in terms of we were getting a lot of textile waste in, but we also had a lot of textile makers and craftspeople who could use that material. So we actually focus specifically on textile waste now. That's not to say that we won't go back out again later on, but at the moment we're just using that because it's a big enough problem just to try and cope with that. So the kind of producers of textile waste in the UK, they might be cutting room floor. So it might be a fashion company, and as part of their pattern, there might be textile waste that falls on the cutting room floor as part of a pattern. There is a big movement within the industry, within the fashion industry, for sort of zero waste pattern cutting to try and make that much better. But that's, I guess we're like an actionable solution for now, while the industry is making changes at the same time. Then there might be a carpet company, for example. So we're working quite closely with a carpet company. They might go and fit out a really huge room in West London, for example, but it might be an L-shaped room, which leaves a huge chunk of carpet left over, which the client doesn't want. They basically don't want to have that in their house. It's just an additional storage issue. And the other company doesn't want to store it either. So normally that would probably go to waste. We would take that, and then we would try and either work with makers who might repurpose that. So that's quite a good example. One girl took rug, what looked like the edge of a rug away. And she said, I'm going to take this and turn it into a dress. And I had absolutely no idea how she was going to do that. But she unpicked the whole thing and rewove it and turned it into this incredible dress that she used as part of her show. And just the creativity, I guess this is what's quite important to the system, is that reuse only really works with it when it's added with creativity. You need all of the people to have the ideas of what it could be. And every week, I mean, it's such a great place to work because people come in and you just get such abstract applications of what they think they're going to do. So one girl took away some curtain material and turned that into like a trouser suit, which was insane. And we've had people use it for collage. We've had people use it for bookbinding. Just the applications are really varied. And yeah, it's great. It's great to see.
Really cool. We were talking before the show a little bit. I mean, if you can ever come up with a business idea, I mean, not even just at the sort of maker scale, but even at a larger industrial scale where your raw product is somebody else's waste product, seems like that's
so
just
as
so
I've been learning a lot. Yeah, I've been learning a lot about circular economy, and there are lots of academics and people who've been working in this area for decades, and there are lots of known kind of themes. And what you're talking about there is what they call industry symbiosis, which is where one industry's waste stream is another industry's materials. Mm-hmm. And there have been lots of governments and lots of initiatives, like Ellen MacArthur Foundation here in the UK is like the biggest circular economy global group, working to try and better understand what those industry symbioses, is that the plural of symbiosis, might be. And that's really important, especially at large scale. There's a lot happening there. I guess the area that we're quite interested in is a little bit, there's a term which kind of gets thrown around, which is like waste hierarchy, that, you know, it's like where is the kind of flow of waste? And what we're looking at quite a specific part of the waste hierarchy, which is bits of material, fabric, textiles, which are quite small, and that some producers, suppliers, they don't think it's going to be of use to anybody. And actually, you need more creativity in order to try and think about how those might be reused. One of the challenges with industry symbiosis, in fact, is that if you become a company that's reliant on a specific source, and then that source dries up, then that obviously plays havoc with your business model. So I guess it's thinking about, and actually one of the things that a lot of companies say is, we couldn't work with that waste because there's not enough of it. And actually we need to be able to produce 30,000 units in order for us to get the, you know, so there is something about it being quite, what's the right word? It works well for craftspeople and makers because they're often working at quite small scale anyway. So that's what works
and not necessarily ramping their scale at any point. It's more of a uniform production.
Exactly. And
output.
often part of their selling point is often that they're saying that each item that they're selling is unique anyway. So actually that plays into that. More and more makers and craftspeople are saying that they want to reuse materials. That was part of the whole emphasis of this project in the first place. We'd interviewed a whole load of makers during COVID when everyone was sat at home with less to do, and trying to get to the kind of the motivations of what our community were really about. And they were all citing the same thing. They were all fed up with having to use new materials and wanted to reuse where possible. And I guess it does play in, this is where the kind of the tickle bit comes in, is it does play into that kind of good life aspect, which is we can lead sustainable lives. It just takes a bit of imagination and time, and we don't need to be creating things out of new materials. We really don't. Just needs a little bit more thinking.
So let's talk about how you got here. One of the things in Tickled itself was, for me, I suddenly realized, oh my God, I don't want to be a business writer anymore. What the hell have I been doing all this time? And almost felt compelled to shift gears in the subject matter of the book and just sort of change my focus. And you went from a 2-decade career in publishing, working with sort of traditional publishing, out on the digital edge, but still traditional publishing. And now you're working with the borough of Hackney, getting scrap pieces of carpet from companies. So
glamour.
Tell us how you what was going on that led you to want to change, and then what gave you the courage or the ambition or whatever you want to call it to make a jump into something that is clear, unless I'm wrong, the complete unknown from where you were. So just for listeners thinking about, the things we do, what do we do? You can do whatever you want. So tell us how this all happened.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question because I may have to piece it all together myself, try and remember. I guess the sort of 10-year period before I started Yodomo, I was already working for myself. So maybe mindset already was quite independent and not worrying too much. It wasn't like I was leaving a full-time job, for example. Right. And I'd gone from quite a traditional publishing arena, so Random House, like a bricks and mortar publisher, and then moved into this kind of digital publishing arena, which then started to segue a little bit with the startup world, because digital publishing became a kind of area of interest to startup and to investors. And as a result of that, I started working with quite a number of startups who were from very different sectors. So it might be, let's say, for example, an American company who had created a content machine, but they realized, oh, actually, we're going to have to work with some publishers to actually populate this thing. How do I do that? And so I got quite interested in startup as a notion. And I was really interested in, I still am very interested in business and business models. In fact, I'm even more interested in them now because I'm trying to work out how business models work in a circular economy, which is really complicated because you're talking about taking money out of the equation a lot of the time, which is really fascinating. But I'm genuinely interested in business models. And towards the end of that period, the sort of period of working on the literary platform where we were working with lots of different startups, we worked with this one startup, which was a €2.5 million project, which I'm not going to say millennials because that sounds like I don't like millennials, 2 young men had managed to leave €2.5 million for a startup project, which, it needed work, but it kind of highlighted to me this world of finance going into an idea, and that money, disappeared and went again. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just going off and tangent now. But what happened was that one of the agencies that was involved with working on this startup with us said to us, well, actually, we're looking now at startup ideas ourselves. We're going to start this incubation arm of our agency. Would you like to come and create a book startup of your own? We think you'd be really good to start up your own company and with your own book startup idea. And I guess confronted by that ask or that opportunity, it made me realize that I had nothing left to say about digital publishing. I was not interested in book startup. I wasn't even sure I was interested in startup per se. So that coincided with another really big thing that happened, which is that 10 years ago, and she was a massive maker. So this is where it all comes from in terms of our family interest in making. She was a sewing teacher, made everything in the house. Every wall was stenciled. Every textile that you saw in the house had been handmade. Clothes were mended. And when she died, we were confronted with this kind of huge house full of machinery, equipment, everything, textiles, everything to do with every kind of craft, a loom, literally like all of these things. And we had to try and work out what to do with it. And I took a lot of it on because I was kind of partly not wanting to let go, but took on all of this machinery. and a lot of textiles. My sister Julia took a lot of textiles as well. I had them at the house. And at that point, I did a refresher course on how to use a sewing machine. And I went to do this course on how to use a sewing machine. And it was a bit like riding a bike. Suddenly these memories of being a child and making it with my mother had come back. And I actually had some skills. I still had some skills, which I was really interested in. This sent me down a rabbit hole of how people learn to make now, and also made, there's a huge maker movement. This is 10 years ago. There was already a huge maker movement that was brewing, a renewed maker movement. And I was kind of interested in that, what was bringing us back to making. And it felt like a very sort of post-digital reaction, that people were moving away from digital technology. What am I going to do if I'm not on my phone? I would like to do something with my hands that is not going to involve the doom scroll. It was interesting that this was happening. So just to come back to the original question, what happened then was when this company said, do you want to do anything that's like a startup around books? I was like, no, definitely not digital publishing. But I am really interested in making, and I'm really interested in how people are learning to make now. And that was the kind of tiny little acorn of the idea at that point. And then I effectively kind of segued into this new world. And a lot of those skills were transferable because writers are not dissimilar to makers in their outlook and their approach. And so suddenly turning my thinking and my experience of working with writers to a maker community was not such a huge leap in that sense. And so, yeah, I guess that was the start of it. But then even within Yodomo, there's been a journey. That's the other thing, because during that period, so we set up in 2017, and in that period, we've had, 2 to 3 years of COVID, and that's obviously had a huge impact on everything as well. And now it's only now that I really feel in my entire life that I'm working with purpose. And I know that's a word that's thrown around a lot, but I genuinely feel like we're doing something that matters. It's the first time I've ever really genuinely felt that in my working career. Just as a sort of little insight though on that, someone texted me this morning and she was talking about how she used to run a startup and now has got a job. And I said, I need to get a job too. And she said, you've got a job. And I said, I know it's a good one, but it would be great if it was a paid job. And I guess that's the difficult bit, is the passion, purpose, circular economy. The difficult bit is trying to work out how we're going to fund all of these sustainable initiatives that are having impact, because we can't just rely on social enterprise. That's my little bugbear of the moment.
So, what's fascinating is my kombucha making thing came about in a very similar way. I suddenly was looking for something to do that was non-digital. And unlike you, I didn't have like a crafting background at all. But suddenly, for me, for the first time ever, I was like, oh my God, it's so great to actually make something that I'm involved in. And likewise, I want to echo too, having written Tickled and started this podcast with Matt, it's the first time in my life where I have felt like I had some purpose, that I actually cared about. You care about specific projects in a career, but it's like I cared about the whole thing. And I look back, I think COVID in particular, for, those of us who had the good fortune of it, gave us a chance to do a little resetting and figure out what it is that really mattered to us. And I make this point in the book, and I've made it with Matt a lot on the podcast. I was like, yes, there were some very horrible parts of COVID, right? Like death. That death is never good for anyone. But it's like, if we can set that aside, there's good and bad things about everything. And I think we've overlooked or maybe less now because you hear more and more stories. But so much good came out of that couple of years that I don't think it's really registered yet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, yeah, you can't ignore the death part of it and a negative impact to a lot of businesses. But the reset bit, I think, has been a positive thing. One of the things that I've really noticed is the reset of larger corporations, even, in terms of their thinking around community and sustainability and just responsibility. I mean, I know America obviously has the B Corp movement, which is now we've got now 1,000 B Corp companies in the UK. And the interest in kind of having that responsible business badge is really fascinating, that it's become so important or become a benchmark within industry. I think that's a lot to do with COVID in a way. That I guess the big thing about COVID with business in particular was its responsibility to its employees and its community. And this idea that business was somehow, it had a place in society. And I don't think we felt like that before. I don't think it was seen in the same way. There was an element of corporate social responsibility, perhaps. But now, when I'm talking to companies now, they're all talking about community. It's so interesting. It's like, when were you ever interested in community? And it's just a massive shift. It's a really big shift and a positive one. I think it is a big positive one.
Well, what's interesting too is it's like, on the one hand, it's not necessarily that everybody has wholesale changed what they're doing, right? Like, companies still do what they did. They make what they made. I think a lot of it has to do with how we think about what we do. And then that has sort of peripheral and tangential effects that we become more aware of than we were before. Right?
Yeah. And I think, again, you've got sort of top down and bottom up approaches to this as well, which is I never thought I would see the day where a VC actually gave monkeys about sustainability or community, but you're now seeing capital interest in companies that have responsibility, and it's deemed to be a good thing. And then from the bottom up, you have consumers saying, actually, I don't want to deal with these companies if they're not, in the right place or being responsible. So that's a massive shift change. It really is. I remember we did this really funny workshop like years ago where we were trying to get to our mission, vision, and values. One of those exercises, half-day workshop for the team. And because we're so, we never have enough money, we basically borrowed a friend's office, which a friend of mine kindly offered up. And in one of our kind of, actionable kind of outputs, we just put be nice, which was we just put that up there. And I remember coming out of this was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and they were all laughing at us. They were literally laughing at us. They couldn't believe that would even be a consideration in any kind of business proposition. And now, ironically, I'm still working with this company. We still do things with them. This has become part of their output as well. Like they're starting to bring in these sentiments, the idea of kind of those words going together, like nice, business. It's interesting. It's a
right.
big shift. Yeah.
So, right.
It is about time. But to your point, Duff, about the people just starting to make and having that thing about making, one of the things that we always notice where people come in for workshops, for example, and they make something, is that absolute joy, especially if they haven't made anything in a long time or ever. A lot of the workshop participants are often from things like lawyers or like banks. There's a real range of people that come to workshops and have that aha moment of like, oh my God, I've made something. And one of our observations is that, like in most people's jobs, you don't really get a tangible output anymore. Everything's so digital, infinite scroll, nothing's ever finished. Your inbox is never empty, everything's infinite. So to have a kind of 2-hour session where you sit down and make something and you have a physical product that comes out at the end of it, I think that plays into human nature, really, that we need to have that sometimes. We need to have that I made it and it's finished and it's over. And now I'll move on to something else.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as a career writer, I did think I had I never really thought of myself as a creative. So I was in nonfiction. It was more like I felt like my books were sort of projects, research projects. But I did feel like there was a creative aspect to what I did. But then kombucha being, and quite literally, my first ever real hobby, which actually involves real hands-on materials and choosing stuff, craftsmanship, but also just sort of, but a kind of specialization that writing is a little too generic for. It was, and it remains to this day, just unbelievable to me how different the feeling is, even between that and writing. And I think we live in this age of abstraction, right? Everybody's kind of abstracted away from doing real things. And so, congratulations, because I think your new thing is helping other people figure out their new thing. And I said it to you the other day, it's like a vortex. It's like if we can get interest going in finding your tickle, right? Which isn't reading things, which isn't gossiping, which isn't simply ordering food off a list, which, and then people will start to feel a kind of connection with their own existence. At least for me, that's what happened. It's like suddenly I was engaged in my own existence again. And you have that feeling. I've described it this way before. This is for our R-rated audience. It's like sometimes when you're high, you never know how high you were until you suddenly come down. And you're like, oh my gosh, I was high. For me, I didn't realize how I wasn't, like how disengaged I was from my own life until suddenly the shift happened. I was like, holy smokes, I was coasting without knowing, right? Just thinking that I was doing things. But if you're not like hooked into your reality in the way you could be, you're just sort of floating through your existence.
And that's what COVID did to a lot of people, I think. It gave them the time and space to think or to actually acknowledge things about their lives, which they'd never had that time to think before. We used to have this thing where when we were doing like initial investment rounds for Yodomo, where we were trying to crowdfund, and people would say, well, who's got the time to make, who actually has the time to make? And in our pitch deck, we used to put this thing, which was, AI is coming down the road and, soon all the robots are going to be doing all the jobs and it's going to create more leisure time for people. And so people are going to be doing more hobbies. And this is where our proposition is going to really come into play. This is pre-reuse offer. And when COVID hit, it was just an acceleration of that. It's like, we don't need AI to come down the road because everyone is at home now and they have to do hobbies. But it was so interesting that I don't know what it was like in the States, but basically in the UK, we had the furlough system. So people were off work and it was subsidized by the government. And so, or they were off work, but they were working from home. So you had not everybody, you have to be careful that it wasn't everybody, but you did have a large part of the population who were sitting around at home with nothing to do really. And it was interesting that it was a stress release. That was the thing that was so interesting, that people were turning to crafts because it relieved them of stress, because humans still need purpose. They can't not be doing anything. That's like all the ChatGPT stuff at the moment. I'm just like, bring it on, take all the jobs, because then we can just get back to whittling wood again. It's fine. It doesn't matter. Let the robots do all the work.
Mm-hmm. Until it's like ChatGPT, make a handbag for me.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
I know, it's crazy. I mean, I have been, because there's a trick for ChatGPT here in the UK, which is you have to get on first thing in the morning because it's before the US gets up, and then you can actually get onto it for free. But yeah, I have been asking it some very complex questions, but it still can't really whittle a spoon.
Not yet. Not yet.
Or make kombucha. Or make
All right.
kombucha.
Or make kombucha, right?
Yeah.
Rockledge Rasa is a one of a kind brand. All right, before we go here, I want to ask a question about your upbringing. As I said, listeners, at the beginning, Sophie's sister is married to my brother. You have what must go down as one of the most preposterously literary families in the history of man. Your father is a poet and an author. Your sister Julia is an author. Her first novel, The House at the Edge of the World, is one of the most delightful books I've read in years. Your other sister is a bookbinder, and you spent a career in publishing. What
my
the
brother
hell?
Published a book. My brother has published a book. As well.
And sorry, your brother. I forgot. Your brother is an artist and a published author of both art books. Right? He's got a couple art books, doesn't he? So, and you guys are from the East Devon, down on the coast, basically in a fishing town. On the south coast of England. What the hell happened? Did the ghost of Shakespeare come into that house and touch all you guys? How did you all end up so intertwined with the worlds of words and books and publishing?
So yeah, that's mostly my dad, I would say, Ralph. And you don't really think about these things as you're growing up, but it's only now when I sort of hear a literary quote and I realize that everything that we ever had was literary quotes at the dinner table. You know, everything was some kind of, with all the Brexit stuff, everyone kept talking about no man is an island. And it's like, we had that quote thrown at us the whole time when we were growing up. And yeah, so it was a kind of an upbringing of literary quotes, and then the combination of my mother, who is really creative as well. So we had the combination. It was quite weirdly Victorian, my upbringing, but you don't even think about these things until you're older. But we didn't have a television. Lots of my friends had TVs, and well, everyone had a TV. On Thursday nights, we were allowed to go to our neighbours to watch Dallas, which was our treat. So we were allowed to go to the neighbours and watch Dallas. Eventually, we were allowed a TV, which was a black and white, tiny little black and white TV. When, you know, by that stage, everyone was onto their kind of huge colour TV, sort of full screen things. And our neighbours used to come around and they'd always make jokes about how we were watching kind of old black and white movies when we were clearly just watching like a soap
Dallas.
opera or something. Exactly. So there was that. And then yeah, what else? I mean, it was a kind of crazy time. Like Christmas was, so my mother was German, and you know, they have a very strong kind of tradition of crafts anyway, and obviously she was a keen maker, but Christmas was always super special. We weren't allowed to open any presents until we performed, and performance was not like a kind of primary school jazz hands thing. You know, it would have to be something quite literary or operatic, or you know, something quite learned. And I mean, Julia, I think, picked up most of it. She's probably the most intellectual out of all of us, and she's the real writer, really, out of the siblings. Kate's work is absolutely incredible. I mean, she's taken on mum and dad in both ways in terms of the visual and the love of books. I guess actually the other bit that I've missed out is that my dad would always take us to bookstores. So we would always be on the hunt in charity shops for secondhand books. So he's got some amazing, I mean, obviously charity shops are not what they used to be, but in the olden days, you know, he's got first editions of The Hobbit and things that he's found in stores in Devon. And everything was always a hunt, you know, looking. So we would go into secondhand shops with him, or charity shops, and he would be teaching us how to identify what an edition was, who the publisher was, what was valuable, what wasn't valuable. And yeah, I mean, I guess it must just have all been instilled into us somehow. I don't even want to work in publishing, if I'm honest. Like that sounds really awful because I know there's lots of people that probably would have really loved to work in publishing, but I was working in Camden Market, which is like a very cold place to work, even though it's great fun. But I had wet feet most of the time. And then my friend Miranda, who I think you've met actually, Duff, she came to New York one time, and then she was the one who was she was quite literary actually. She was really always wanted to work in publishing, and she started working at Routledge, which is an academic publisher. And then that was my segue in. I kind of went in and did a work experience slot there. Yeah, it's funny because I'm watching Seinfeld at the moment, which is reruns of Seinfeld, and of course the publishing house always comes into that, and it does make me feel quite nostalgic for an era of publishing. That is, there was a funny time for publishing. I don't know if it's the same as it used to be, but yeah, we've all got it, and it's quite funny. My dad's proudly got us a bookshelf in his house which has got his books on it, and then all of the books of all of his children on there. And I don't think there's probably other families that have it, but maybe we are a bit of an anomaly. I don't know.
Well, good to see that you're catching up with lost time by watching those Seinfeld reruns.
I know. I love them.
She wasn't allowed as a kid. All right, Sophie, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And thank you for all you're doing with the company and the circular economy and stuff. It's very inspiring. And get people making stuff again. From my own experience, like I said, it's one of the greatest feelings I've ever had. So the fact that you're a facilitator of all that, congrats and thank you very much. It's wonderful. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you both. Nice to see you and to meet you. Yeah, and nice to talk. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Great talking to you, Sophie.
Cheers.
All right, so there you have it. That is, she's not really my sister-in-law. You're not a
No, I know what you mean. I have my brother-in-law's my brother-in-law Jeff, who you know quite well. Jeff's brothers would be the equivalent. Ross and Don Bright Up are my. I can't, and I know them so well, and I've known them for like 30 years. And when I describe them, I just say my brother-in-law, because what are you going to say? Sometimes I say my brother-in-law, my brother-in-law's brother, but usually just say brother-in-law. You can call her your sister-in-law.
What a wild thing to be doing too, is like getting involved. I didn't actually realize it until we were talking there. It's like the creativity in making kombucha. Like I said, it's been one of the most satisfying things for me in memory. She's actually helping people find that again, and then also helping source their raw materials for them. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a little bit, Marxist, I guess, like in sort of like reacquainting people with the means of production by like encouraging this kind of handcrafted thing. I don't know. I mean, I guess there are scores of people that will leave their jobs and use this as their primary, means of income. But I imagine there's a lot of people that this is a side hustle or, a hobby that they can earn some income from, right? It's like a little thing.
But you can take me, kombucha, we make $0. I've never sold a single bottle. So it's,
well, you never charged me for mine. I mean, it just arrived and I drank it. Yeah.
I learned how to do a thing, and it's brought me great joy just to do that thing separate from money. And, she makes the point that it's really hard to get a circular economy, actually business model going, because you're dealing with weird kind of flux of flow of material and demand, and et cetera.
Your supply, concepts like the supply chain. It's like supply chain ran out because my supply chain was that one roll of fabric or that one, weird piece of carpet that was from the L-shaped room. And it's like, once I used it up, then, I was kind of on to the next thing, which I guess she can kind of be the pipeline for that kind of stuff, but it's not, it's uneven.
Makes it inherently volatile, right? You can't forecast that. All right. So I've got a good one for you that I just learned yesterday. So, was reading about awareness and our ideas of distance, right? So, like, is space real? And the guy was making the following point. He says, so if you're trying to look at a thing that's too far away for you to see, right? Call it a star, or let's say you're at some concert and you can't see the stage. So you get either a telescope or a pair of binoculars, right? And you look through it and you can see it quite clearly, right? So the telescope did not bring the star closer to you, right? The star is still exactly the same distance away from you that it was. It simply aided your eye, which was incapable of seeing it at whatever distance, to see it. So in both those circumstances, of binoculars looking at something or a telescope, it's not actually the distance of a thing that matters. It's whether it's cognizable to you. Right?
Cognizable? Is this your I've got one for?
No. So basically, it's whether you can pull it into your awareness in such a way that you can get a hold on it. Right. Mm-hmm. So if you and I are both looking at over some long distance and I say, can you see that thing? And you say, no, I can't. I'm like, what? You can't see that thing? It's just so it's too far for you to see, not too far for me to see. Say my eyesight's just a little better. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's not actually distance that matters. It's awareness that matters. Right. So you can see a thing if you're aware of it. So you can see a star through a telescope. So essentially, distance is an illusion. It's not real. It's relative. It's simply whether something lies inside or outside your understanding. Right. So in physical, we think of a physical distance as a real thing, but think of an idea, right? Like something that lies just outside the realm of your current understanding. It's too far outside your understanding. So it's sort of mentally distant for you. And then if you learn something that pulls it in and you're like, oh no, I get that now, it's no longer mentally distant. So distance, awareness is all. Distance is not real. Distance is only an appearance and only in a particular circumstance, and it's not universal.
Is it that it's not real, or it's relative?
It's relative, which means it's not real, right? It means that the underlying is not influenced by the physical distance, right? It's just simply whether you can pull it into your awareness. So that one kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh, wow. So,
okay, we got to talk about the fact that you threw cognize there. like cognize, like if you cognize something, do you need to cognize it again in order to recognize it? To recognize something.
There you go.
Right? You've cognized it for the first time, and then when you recognize it, recognize. That's
same point, right?
You buried an amazing. I've got one for you right inside of that.
I didn't even know I had it. So that's teamwork for you. All right. So to close things out, I have a quote from again, he's my current guy. His name's Siddha Rameshwar Maharaj, who pointed me to that difference between awareness and distance. And it's just kind of fascinating. He says, just as in a seed, the entire tree is present, the whole world exists in awareness. Trees proliferate from the seed. Similarly, this Maya is what the yogis call illusion, or awareness is the seed from which this world has proliferated. Consider your experience during deep sleep. You do not have the slightest perception of the existence of the world, your wife, your own body, or anything that's near you. The world exists only as long as you perceive it. When the world is forgotten, this state is called deep sleep. In the dream, the same awareness projects another world. So your awareness when you're dreaming, you perceive something else. When space and bodies are created in the dream, is there actually any space? No. The one who makes place basically creates a place for space itself is your awareness. It is the support of the whole world. So, just to recap, when you dream, there's space in your dream, but it's not an actual space. You're just lying there on your bed, right? If you're dreaming a football field, there's no football field. It's in your mind.
It's in your dreamscape.
It's in your dreamscape. And in the point the yogis make, which is so hard to wrap your head around, but which I'm just toying with all the time now, is it's the same when you're awake. You just think it's different.
So when you die, it's not you that ceases to exist. It's the world that ceases to exist. This world.
The world as far as you're concerned. Right? So there's
Isn't that the only world? Isn't that the only world, though? I thought that was part of this.
No, your
I've been trying to follow along at home here.
Okay, your mind creates universes, right? And they're all so like when you have a new thought, right? So say you got a hate on for somebody, right? And the world just gets a little colored by that, right? The world that you're living in includes this person that you hate or this person that you love, right? And then you change your mind about that and you're like, "Oh no, they're not so bad." And so suddenly the world's different. So you're throwing off these universes in your mind every time you have a new thought, right? So it just is more clear at night that when you're dreaming what's happening, that your mind is throwing off universes. It's the same thing that's happening during the day. We're just not aware of it. On which note, thank you for listening.
Yeah, we'll be back with a new universe next week.
Next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All of you. Bye.
At the present moment, traveling town to town, the mystery of the motion, right here, right now. Right here, right now. Whoa, right here, right now.
You've been listening to How to Tickle Yourself with your hosts Duff McDonald and Matt McButter. You can help us by liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with others. You can talk to us and see what else is happening on Instagram and Facebook at How to Tickle Yourself. This program was recorded in Studio B of the historic Rockledge Recording Studio and the Tunnel Under Arundel. Right Here, Right Now, our original 16-part theme music was written and recorded by the legendary Paul Reddick and Kyle Ferguson of the Sidemen, with the brilliant Steve Mariner on bass and drums and in the mixing room. The podcast is produced and distributed by Storic Media. Our editor is Andrew Steiner. Our coordinator is Samantha Abramovitz. Our producers are Kristen Verbitsky and Chuck LaBella. For more information, visit storicmedia.com. That's STORIC media.com.
My love, my dear.